Hi, my name is Vittorio Di Cocco from Cassino University, Italy, and I show you a new integrated model on shape of memory alloys able to describe the variation of microstructure during loading-unloading process, able to predict the mechanical behavior too. The model is limited to describe the variation of a microstructure only in case of two-phases material, but the extension of the model to material able to generate other phases, I think is trivial. Shape memory alloys are more and more used in many fields of industry, starting from human health as cardiac stents or other part of bone prosthesis, to other fields as available constructions or components for fine fire control and so on. This is due to the ability of these kinds of material to recover the initial shape also after high velocity deformation, because they are able to change the microstructure under a load or deformation actions without any recrystallizations. There are a lot of shape memory alloys. For example, the copper-based shape memory alloy, which are characterized by not so high performances due to problem of the microstructure close to the boundary grains. Other shape memory alloys are the nickel-titanium one that are now most used thanks to their performances and the chemical resistance. So, the recovery of the initial shape takes place if the temperature is greater than a critical temperature and the material is able to recover the initial structure. In case of the environment temperature lower than the critical temperature, it is necessary to heat the component to recover the initial shape, and in this case the material is named as shape memory. Elsewhere, if the critical temperature is lower than the environment temperature, the material is able to recover the initial shape without extra energy, recovering the initial shape by itself. In this case, the material is named as shape memory alloys with a pseudo-elastic effect. Now, in this slide, you can see a schema of mechanical behavior of shape memory alloys. You can see three different stages. The first one, stage 1, is characterized by a linear elastic behavior, which has slope, which is the Young modulus of the austenite. Austenite is the lower phases, initial phases of this material. Then we have a second stage, which is similar to a plateau, and sometimes is schematized as this. In this stage, we have a changing of microstructure from austenite to martensite. And then over this stage, we have the third stage, characterized by a slope different to the slope of the first stage. This slope is the slope of the martensite. This schema is usually used for calculus of behavior of components, but it is just a simplified schema. Considering that the shape memory alloys are characterized by microstructure changes due to the external loading, the question is, which are the kinds of microstructures which can see in this kind of alloys, and which is the microstructure evolution? And another question is, which is the influence of the microstructures when on the behavior of material in terms of stress strain? In this work, we proposed a simple model able to describe the mechanical behavior of the shape memory alloy characterized by a pseudo-elastic effect, which take into account the microstructure, the real microstructure of the material. In order to better describe the phenomena, we start from the experimental results. And the first step has been to produce the material using a vacuum crucible posed in a furnace without air, and using a noble gas like argon in order to eliminate oxygen inside. We use the crucible made on yttria because the yttria is very stable in terms of chemical action, and the casting have been in a mold made on graphite, as you can see in the slide. The product of the casting is the ingot. It's a very short ingot. The height is around 5 centimeters, and the material has been characterized both in terms of the chemical composition. You can see that the quantity of the nickel titanium in atoms is quite similar, and in terms of microstructure, you can see the magnification. This is around 500 per of magnification. Then, starting from the ingot, mini dog bone specimen have been produced like this. You can see that the calibrated length is around 16 millimeters, and the total length of the specimen is 13 millimeters. This specimen has been put in a tool. It's a mini machine, patented mini machine, which allow us to perform a loading test using load cell in order to measure the total force applied on the specimen, and with an LVDT we can control the movement of the crosshead. This tool is able to put under load the specimen inside of machine, able to perform the XRD test in order to observe the diffraction spectrum, which is the base to better understand the position and of atoms, and in this case the structure, the microstructure. Tests have been performed by using a loading and unloading cycle test, and here we can see the first cycle split in two different cases. The first one is the loading condition, with the presence of the first stage characterized by the presence of austenite. The second stage is the plateau, but you can see the plateau is not characterized by a slope equal to 0, but the slope is greater than 0. It's the minimum slope that you can see in these curves. Then over we have the third stage characterized by the slope of the martensite. In a loading condition, you can see the third stage is wider than the first one in loading condition, and then we have a different second stage where we have a transformation of martensite in austenite. Is a reverse transformation, and then the first stage is very short here, characterized by the recovery of elastic energy of the austenite. In order to analyze the position of atoms at the microstructure, we have to perform the diffraction, X-ray diffraction on the specimen, and we use the tools described in the previous slides. using a step-by-step technique. The step investigated in loading conditions, starting to the unloading condition. Then we have used the different steps, 2.5% of engineering deformation and so on, up to 10% of engineering deformation. And then in back direction, we used loading steps in order to perform the diffraction on the calibrated length under load. This is an example of a spectrum measured by a diffraction on calibrated length in undeformed condition. In this case, the material is characterized by a presence of arsenite, and the first peak is the main peak of the diffraction of arsenite, followed by the second peak here and the third peak here. We have another peak, very short peak here, but 3 peaks are sufficient to interpolate the data in order to calculate the parameter cell in the cell. In this case, we discovered that the cell is cubic, characterized by a position of nickel atoms on the vertex of the cell and the titanium atom inside each cell. The spectrum taken at maximum deformation, 10% of engineering deformation, show that the first peaks of arsenite disappear. It was in this position, around in this position, and all the peaks disappears. It means that the martensite quantity is 10% of the material. And the main peak of martensite is this, followed by the second and the third one, like this. Elaborating these peaks, the microstructure seems to be this. Is characterized by an angle different to 19 degree. This is a monoclinic cell, which the nickel and titanium atoms are positioned on the vertex of the cell. It means that, for example, in loading condition, we will start using a material characterized by stage 1. Then we have the stage 2, sometimes named as a plateau, but is not a real plateau, and the third stage. It means that at the first stage we have a presence of a cubic cell. At the third stage we have a monoclinic cell. In the stage 2 we have the presence of both of them, cubic and monoclinic cells. Considering all the tensile steps, we can see that in the first spectrum we can calculate the cell parameter of a cubic cell. Using initial deformation step 2.50%, we can see that the position of peaks changes in terms of angles, diffraction angles. And it means that we have cubic centered cells, but the dimensions are changed, are increased. Then we have a presence of the peak of the martensite. It means that we have a presence of the monoclinic cell. In order to calculate the variation of cell parameter, we can see that from the first spectrum, the cell parameters is around 3.012 angstrom. At 2.15% of deformation, the cell parameter increased up to 3.072 angstrom, and cell parameters of the monoclinic cell is an angle of 80 degree. The first cell parameter is 2.6 angstrom, and the second one is 3.8. Considering as zero the position of the titanium atoms on the bottom of the monoclinic cell, you can calculate the distance in plane direction, in x direction of the atom of nickel as this. And we can see we have an extra deformation of 0.187 angstrom. This is an extra deformation which characterized the presence of the plateau. The excess of the position of the titanium or nickel atoms is the responsible of the decreasing of slope from the first stage to the second stage of the stress-strain curve, because the excess of the deformation when a cubic cell become monoclinic relax all the cells around this transformation. Furthermore, from the spectrum is possible to calculate the quantity of the austenite and martensite present on the material, and in this case the results are reported in the graph on the right. You can see that we have a presence of austenite. The material is fully austenite, and then the quantity of austenite decreases down to 0. And the transformation of austenite in martensite is similar to a mirror, and we have an increase of the martensite up to 1. The transformation is not linear, as you can see here. For example, the center of the second stage, sometimes the quantity of austenite and martensite are reported in the literature is equal to 50%. It's not true, because as you can see at the center of the second stage, the quantity of austenite is greater than the quantity of the martensite, because the transformation is not linear. In order to modelize the variation of a microstructure, we hypothesized the presence of energetic potential E, which depends on deformation epsilon, but depends on the quantity of austenite and martensite too. In differential form, the variation of this potential it's equal to the linear contribution of the deformation epsilon, which multiplied a constant c. In this case, the model is perfectly linear. It's the model that we can see in literature. But in this case, we use the contribution 2 of the austenite in this manner, the variation of austenite on the quantity of the austenite, plus the contribution of the martensite at the same manner, but using a negative sign, because we postulated that the austenite transforms in martensite and vice versa without any other phases, intermediate phase. The equilibrium takes place when this differential is equal to 0, like this. And integrating this equation, you can see that the formulation is very, very easy. A constant d is equal to the constant c, which multiplies the deformation plus the logarithm of austenite on the martensite. Taking into account that the summation of quantity of austenite and martensite is equal to 1, you can calculate the quantity of martensite like this, and the quantity of austenite like this. This and this are the equation which calculate the quantity of martensite and austenite during a deformation process characterized by an epsilon of deformation level. Considering the results in terms of quantity of martensite and austenite taken from the step-by-step tests in loading and unloading condition at the first cycle, we can calculate the values of the parameter C and D. You can see that the C is always equal to 1 and D changes from 700 to 70, and in this case the parameter D takes into account the hysteresis of the material. In the graph you can see how the plotted functions seems fit well the quantity of measured microstructures. Calculating the parameters not only for the first cycle but for the 10th cycle, you can see that the parameter C changed from 1 to 0.9 and the parameter D are always the same in the loading and unloading conditions. Next, at the 50th cycle, the parameter C decreases again, and after 100 cycles decrease too. Plotting the parameter C in terms of the cycles, you can see a behavior like this. It means that the parameter C takes into account a sort of a fatigue effect in the shape memory alloys. In terms of mechanical behavior, we can introduce a modified Young modulus of the material, starting from the Young modulus of austenite and martensite, for example, weighted by the quantity of austenite and martensite. It's a real easy formula, but it doesn't work because the E in this formulation starts from the E of austenite ranging to the E of martensite and never assume values near to close to 0. In the second stage, we saw the presence of a region where the slope tends to 0. It doesn't work because not all the structure participate to the increment of the stress versus an increment of the strain. This is due to the phenomenon of transformation of austenite in martensite in tensile test, for example, and it is necessary to correct the quantity of austenite which participate to the increment of the stress, excluding or taking into account the quantity of austenite which is transforming in martensite. The new formulation is similar to this. We can see that the austenite is corrected by a derivation of quantity of austenite in deformation epsilon. It means that in this case this quantity it doesn't participate to the increment of the stress. At the same manner, we can correct the action of the martensite. The equation of the austenite and martensite are calculated in previous model, and it is easy to carry out the derivation of quantity of austenite and martensite to as this. We can calculate the parameter key A and key M again from the results, experimental results, and you can see a fitting like this, and in this case the parameters K of austenite and martensite changes in loading and unloading condition. These are the values for the first cycle, and these are the values of the 100th cycle. In terms of simulation in a commercial software, you can see the variation of the deformation and the increase of the stress in this simulation. And here you can see the calculated load present on the load of the on the head of the spaceman during the deformation in tensile stress at the first cycle. You can see that the results fit very well the experimental results. In conclusion, we proposed a model, easy model, able to calculate the quantity of austenite and martensite during the loading and unloading process, and it's able to predict the stress strain behavior of shape memory alloys, taking into account the real quantity of the austenite and martensite present in the material. This model is easy to implement in commercial software, but takes into account just the material characterized by presence of two phases, austenite and martensite, without any other phases. But the extension of this model, I think, is not so hard to formulate. Thank you very much.